All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Grant Edwards. I'm an assistant director of college counseling here at Petty, also teaching the English department. And along with my amazing colleagues, Sarah Venanzi, Joe Rulowich, our director, Lisa McClellan, and Ann Weissenberger, our office in college counseling is really excited to welcome you for an hopefully really enlightening conversation with one of our favorite members of the admission office staff around the country and one of the esteemed colleagues at the University of Chicago, Mr. Jack Baer. Jack is a graduate of Lehigh, and Lisa McClellan does not hold that against him, even though she and her husband are dyed-in-the-wool Lafayette Leopards. Worked in the admissions office at Bates College up in Maine, and has been at UChicago for 7 years now. He was here about a month and a half ago to address our juniors who are just starting this college process, and he talked with them about the kind of writing of the college essay. And so you're getting a slightly different perspective. He's going to talk with you about, okay, you're parents of 9th and 10th graders. Maybe some of you have had students go through this process before. Maybe some of you are brand new to this. What should we be thinking about? How should we be approaching this? And what are some kind of things to have on your dashboard? If you're thinking, all right, I'm driving down this road, to borrow a metaphor from Luke and Jaleesa, our co-presidents, we're driving down this road. What should we be looking for? What should we be thinking about? What should we have right in front of our face? He'll have a really informative presentation. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you can flag down Laura Lee, who's amazing and doing so much for you today, or Sarah or myself. Before we get started, thank you to everybody joining us on the live stream, and most importantly, thank you to John Lukes, who runs all of our audio-visual stuff, does so much around here as well. Without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Jack. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, let's give a round of applause for everyone who put this day together. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here today. My name is Jack. I'm one of the Senior Associate Directors of Admission at the University of Chicago. I do a few things in my office, but one of my primary responsibilities is really to work with students from and read applications from the beautiful state of New Jersey. I'm originally a Jersey boy. I'm from a small town in Monmouth County called Seagirt, New Jersey, if anyone's familiar with the shore towns. Went to Manasquan High School. So these are really, really fun conversations for me, because I get to get home and talk with students from a really special place. So today I'll kind of be talking with you about ways that you can think about kind of the college search and application process at this point in your student's high school experience, which is you're still pretty early on in the process, and there's not a whole lot hard and fast that you need to do right now, but there are some ways that you can kind of start thinking about this process now. So with that in mind, I'd like to do a little bit of crowd work and get to know kind of a little bit more about you. So could you raise your hand if you have a current 10th grader here at Petty? Okay. Can you raise your hand if you have a 9th grader? Okay, so that feels kind of equally split. Can you raise your hand if you've had a student, an older sibling maybe, of your current student go successfully through the college search process? How many of you are survivors? Okay, great. Okay, great. So look around other families. You will make it through this. Your students will have great options. They will find fantastic homes. This is a really, really exciting process in many ways, but it is a process that's kind of shrouded in mystery and anxiety, but it shouldn't be. It's a really, once again, really exciting time, and hopefully you get a lot out of this journey with your student. So with that in mind, I'd like to also just do a quick kind of poll of the audience. So I'm gonna pull a screen up here. There is a QR code here, so if you wanna bring out your phones, you can either go to slido.com and then kind of put in this code, or you can just click, find the QR code. And so I'd just like to gain a sense of what comes to mind for you when you hear the term college admissions. Okay. We're starting out very strong. Rejection. Oh my gosh, these are way darker than I thought they would be. Okay, just looking at some of these, I see exciting and overwhelming. I see quite a few overwhelming. Irrational, competitive. Let's look for positive things. Optimistic. Do you see anything else positive here? Opportunity. Yes, journey. Okay, proud, right. So there are actually some positive things here. Yes, but it's kind of helpful to know kind of the words that you associate with this process. And, I'm kind of joking about it, but I could probably anticipate that a lot of these words would come up. I think the college process can be shrouded in mystery. It can be shrouded, once again, in anxiety. But you should know that this is a real human process, both for your students at Petty. You have a tremendous college counseling office here, but they also work really hard to have really strong relationships with the college, which it really oftentimes means just a person in the admissions office. And so it is all of these things, but it's an exciting process. It's also a time where you're gonna get to know your students in a way that you probably haven't gotten to know them before. You're gonna be in the car driving hours to a random school someplace, and you're gonna eat lunch with them before that campus tour. And you're gonna have these really meaningful conversations that you probably didn't know you were gonna have. And for your students also, this is a really exciting time. It's a time of becoming more independent. It's a time of great reflection. They're gonna learn how to manage their time in a new way. So they're also going to learn how to do many different types of things. One of the first of which is really self-reflect and think about what is really, really meaningful for them. So with that in mind, I'd like to also just start, before I start talking about kind of the many ways that your students can start thinking about college, just a few notes that I'd like to kind of highlight. And this is coming very much from one perspective, so kind of like the highly selective admission set. So schools, where the acceptance rate is 30% or lower. Typically in a highly selective admission setting, 90% of students who apply are perfectly academically admissible. The time that we look at the transcript is important, but going into the file, we know that they're probably going to be just fine academically at our institution. But, and this is for UChicago's, in UChicago's case, we have 50,000 students applied last year. We cannot admit 90% of that cohort because we just don't have the beds on campus, and the Office of Housing and Residence Life would be very, very upset with us. So this is not going to kind of lay out a hard and fast formula that you can apply in order to secure and guarantee your students at the place that they want to be. There is really no formula to this process. There are best practices, and it's a really defined process in many ways, but in many ways, there's also a lot of subjectivity. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of approach presentation of yourself when you look at curating your application materials. And also, there's never a guarantee in this process. Your student can do everything right, and it might not work out for them. On the flip side, they can do many things wrong, and it could still work out for them. There's really no there's really no kind of guarantee as you kind of look through searching and applying for college. So rather, what I'm hopefully looking to do here is to kind of think through those things that students can do early on in their time in high school, the remainder of their 9th grade year, the remainder of their 10th grade year, to start kind of flexing those muscles that will help them both develop their interests and then also nurture skills that will help them be successful in high school, in the college search process, and then also once they come to our campuses. I was listening to a podcast this week. I don't know if anyone is interested in admissions podcasts. It's a really niche interest to have, admittedly. But there's a podcast out there. It's called Admissions Beat. It's led by Lee Coffin, who's Dartmouth's VP of Enrollment. But he was actually talking with a few people on his podcast today about the college search process. And one of the guests said, a good college search process doesn't start with the college. It really starts with the student looking at themselves in the mirror and doing quite a bit of self-reflection and figuring out what excites them and where they can learn best. I thought that was kind of fitting given our conversation here today. Another quick note. So admissions officers were really trained to create narratives when we look at an application. We are trained to look at trends, and we are really trained to take all the disparate threads of an application, so the transcript, the letters of recommendation, the essays, and really weave it together to create a cohesive narrative. So all 4 years are really important to our forming that image, but students' junior and senior years are perhaps the most important. Why is that? For many reasons. The person that your student is at 17 and 18 years old is very, very different from the student that they are when they are 14 and 15 years old. And that person, with their interests, with their skills, with who they are in the classroom and outside of the classroom, that is so much closer to the student that we will get on our campus than who they were when they arrived at Petty and when they were earlier on in their journey here. So ninth and 10th grade are part of the story, but we also go into this process very sobered-eyed as admissions officers, and we know that these students are only 14 and 15 years old. They're unfinished products when they come here. They're unfinished products when they leave here, and so we are never expecting perfection in this process. We are hoping to see that they are exploring, that they are transitioning and changing in many ways. Learning to explore, change your mind, be resilient in the face of failure or finding out that you don't like something, those are all really, really important skills that they will do when they come to our school. So if we can see that in their application, that is going to be important to us. So this is not the time to panic or expect perfection. If any of you, in these first 2 years haven't seen less than perfection or seen your students, fumble in ways that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really concerned about your ability to get into a great college or university, don't think that. That is not true. We don't expect perfection. And also, this isn't really necessarily a time where you need to be focusing upon talking about college or university. There's going to be a lot of time for that during their, last year and a half here. And so if you're kind of stressing out that you haven't started this process or you haven't even started talking about it, that's really, really fine. Okay, so with that in mind, we can talk about some things that we will look for. Once again, the 9th and 10th grade is part of this larger narrative that we're crafting when we take a holistic approach to application review. And when you go through this process, I know some people have had students successfully navigate college admissions. You probably will hear this term holistic a lot. This basically is the approach that many colleges and universities will take. And it basically means that we will look at everything that your student submits to really create an image of who they are as a community member, but also as a scholar. And then based upon that cohesive image, we will render an admissions decision that makes the best sense for you as an applicant, but also us as an institution that really needs to manage multiple institutional priorities. So it's a lot. We take a lot into account, and 9th and 10th grade are going to be a part of that picture. So what are the things that we will look for? The hard and fast items are going to be grades. So when we look at an application, all of it is going to be important. The first question we do ask, though, is, will a student be successful here academically? So that is when we go to the transcript to really understand who they are as a scholar and how have they done in the curriculum that they've chosen. So when we're looking at 9th and 10th grade, we look at the importance of challenging themselves within what's available to them. And this will look different depending upon whether they're in 9th or 10th grade or whether they're 11th or 12th grade. We do understand oftentimes earlier on in high school, students don't have a lot of choice in the classroom. You're going to take 2 years of the 5 core subjects, so science, math, English, history, or a social science. There might be opportunity to kind of go beyond that, or within one of those fields kind of have choice as to what they will take. But for the most part, your first 2 years in high school are pretty well prescribed, and so we know that going into the application review. We also know that challenge is also how students challenge themselves will look differently earlier on in high school. Here at Petty, where I think you have 22 AP classes, we know that students aren't really going to be taking advantage of them until they're in 11th and 12th grade. So if we see 1 AP class or 2 AP classes, we know that that is going beyond kind of what's traditionally what we see, and so we take that into consideration. Extracurricular activities. So I'll kind of talk about this a little bit more a little bit further on in our conversation, but we define extracurriculars really, really broadly in this process. We really don't mind what students do outside of the classroom. It's not my job to tell your student where they find community and what they like to do. That is totally their job. And so we define it really broadly, and we want to hear about all of the things that students have done outside of the classroom. There can be this misconception that a student needs to be well-rounded in order to get admitted to college, and that is not the case at all. I always remind students that in this process, as an admissions staff, we are looking to create a first-year cohort, a first-year class who is of themselves a well-rounded community. So we want students who are athletes and researchers and musicians and aspiring PhD students and politicians. We do not need everyone to be an athlete, musician, researcher, class president themselves, because that would create a first-year class of 1,800 carbon copies of each other. And how boring would that be? So it's great if your students have many different types of interests, so they kind of look like a traditionally well-rounded student. But if you're finding that they are kind of they're spending their time in one area outside of the classroom, that is completely fine. Sometimes, junior and senior year, I see students all of a sudden become really excited about community service or something. And I'm like, where did that come from? Do not feel pressure to kind of, fabricate, this portfolio of things outside of the classroom, because if your student doesn't like to do it, there's going to be someone else who authentically likes to do that, and that authenticity does come through in the application. So don't feel that pressure to kind of, manufacture this extracurricular list in a way that you think it will look good for us. Ultimately, authenticity is good for us. And we also know sometimes there are just generally extracurriculars that take a lot of time outside of the classroom. Varsity athletes, that is sometimes a full job unto itself. I always joke whenever I see a student who does ballet, I don't expect you to do anything else but ballet. Ballet is so hard and time intensive. And so if you are taking ballet really seriously, that's probably one of 2 things that you might mention that you're doing. So just take that into account. Quality is so much more important than quantity. We also, beyond well-rounded, we do talk about well-angled students. So these are those students who are, drawn to one area of, their extracurricular portfolio versus the other. So, a student who likes sports or likes music or likes research, that would be kind of, but also does other things, that would be kind of our definition of a well-angled student. And then the last kind of term, pointy, this really refers to a student who really kind of shows really intense interest and passion for maybe kind of 1 or 2 things. And that is okay. There is room for every type of student on our college campus. I think from a school that has a liberal arts curriculum, that has a lot of opportunity, we like to see kind of more well-angled students or well-rounded students versus a pointy student. But if a student is pointy and we think that they are going to really succeed at UChicago, I will absolutely advocate for them to come. Continuity versus authenticity. We are looking for continuity in some of these extracurricular activities. So we're looking for hopefully engagement across 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. If ultimately students choose to change what they're interested in, that is completely fine. If any of your students out there are struggling to find what they like to do, it is okay if they want to change their mind and try something new. Authenticity is so much more important than continuity in this process. So if students want to kind of bop around and find what excites them, that from our angle, from our perspective, is perfectly okay. I will also show you kind of a screenshot of a student who was admitted to UChicago this past spring, and you'll kind of see some gaps in what she does, hopefully as proof that is completely fine. And then leadership and impact. This is also something that we're looking at. So within that extracurricular list, we're hopefully seeing that a student has attained some type of leadership role or some type of impact. I typically tell students, there's only ever like one captain or one vice president or one president or one treasurer. Like those hard and fast leadership activities, titles rather, can be really hard to come by because they are so limited. So I tell students, don't focus upon the title, focus upon the impact. And I think this can be particularly helpful for students earlier on in 9th and 10th grade who can't be president of that club just yet. There is ways to have significant impact in an extracurricular. Maybe you're increasing participation in a club, or maybe you are starting a fundraising effort that amassed a certain amount of money, or there's just many ways that you can actually have impact. And so think about that if your students are ever getting scared that there's not leadership for me, or I'm not the president, or I'm not the captain. That is completely fine. There's ways to also demonstrate your ability to have meaningful participation. Soft skills and deep level thinking. This is really, really important and something that students this is kind of when I talked about those muscles that students can start flexing. This is really kind of what students can be doing almost immediately in high school. When we look through students' applications, we are looking to see that they have evidence of really, really good soft skills that will show them to be someone who can be a respectful, engaged community member, both inside and outside of the classroom. So when we look at the soft skills and life skills that we're looking at at things like time management. We're looking at organization, we're looking at independence, we're looking at building relationships. These are all things that your students might not articulate in their application, but these are the skills that they can employ that will make sure that they do well in a class and are engaged outside of coursework, and that their teachers know them really well and can write really good letters of recommendation. These are the kind of soft skills that we look for in the admissions process. And that in very small but subtle ways show up in a student's applications. They're also going to be a way that these skills, if kind of nurtured correctly, will allow students to approach applying to college in a really mature, effective way. When we think about building relationships, some of this process can include building a relationship with the admission officer at a school. We all basically publish our emails on our websites, and we would love to get to know students who are applying to UChicago. I would love to get to know you, but I would really like to get to know your student, right? And when we go through this process, a student who can correspond professionally with me and kind of advocate for themselves, ask questions by themselves, those are the soft skills that when they come time to apply, I think this student could actually be really successful in college, because they're going to have to create relationships with professors. They're going to need to advocate if they need something in the classroom. So soft skills are really, really important to us when we kind of go through the process. Really, ninth and 10th grade is really the time during which passions will come into focus. It's really this earlier time that's going to be the context through which we can kind of understand later achievements and things that the students will do later. Another really big kind of skill that students will get to know now is course correction. So, in ninth and 10th grade, during this time of transitioning to Petty, which is an amazing place with many different types of resources, they're probably going to have to course correct. And, teaching students how to be resilient, how to think about what's working, what's not working, those are going to be really, really important skills that will set themselves up for success, once again, during their 11th and 12th grade years, but then also as they apply to college. There's just a lot of data out there and a lot of articles coming out about the importance of soft skills, and we also talk about this, when we talk to 11th and 12th graders. But I think in this age of AI, when students are, given so many different types of technological resources that are so amazing in so many ways, I think in our process, we're constantly trying to talk with high school students about the importance of learning how to use these tools correctly, using them, ethically, and that also there's always going to be a premium placed on soft skills. So, learning how to navigate conflict, learning how to disagree politely and politically. Those are all really important, especially in this age where many colleges, campuses find ourselves. We want to know that students will come to our spaces and yes, disagree, yes, contribute to really vibrant discourse, but also do it in a way that is respectful, and very respectful. So that's what I'll just say. So in 9th and 10th grade, there's really kind of three things that I think students can do right now. One of them is explore. This has been a theme. Once again, we're not expecting continuity, we are expecting gaps. There's many ways that exploration can happen in 9th and 10th grade, inside and outside of the classroom. Some of these are more obvious: clubs, organizations. Summer programs can be really, really great. So many colleges and universities at this point do run some type of summer program for high school students. What's really, really nice about these is that these take many different formats. So some of them are on campus, some of them are virtual, some of them are 1 week long, a few days, some of them are 3 weeks long. Some are credit bearing, so students can actually arrive to that college campus, stay on campus in the residence halls, leave with a transcript from that college or university that they can then, show to other colleges when they apply that, hey, I took this course. And generally, I think there's benefit to longer format programs when students are in high school. It gives them an opportunity to be on our campuses longer, gives them an opportunity to see what it's like to be on campus, more than if you were on campus for an hour campus tour. It's also it's nice for students who might have an interest. You maybe have a student out there who's interested in journalism or interested in molecular engineering or history. Most colleges will have some type of summer program where you can take a class in that area. And so it's a really nice time for you to show up, take a class, and maybe you leave completely energized about that topic, or you leave completely convinced that you never want to see that topic again. But there's a lot to be gained, regardless of how you feel about the topic. I think students come away with a much better sense of who they are academically, what interests them, and then also what they're looking for in a college. UChicago has many summer programs, and sometimes students come. Oftentimes our goal, we want to show them the best of UChicago, and we want them to leave completely enamored. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes students leave and they're like, I don't really like this place. And that's fine. They're leaving that armed with really, really helpful information that can help them then pivot their search to find a community that might be a little bit more aligned with what they want to do. Curricular choices, this really applies to coursework, so students can hopefully kind of try out different courses, whether they be electives or core classes. Exploration, especially earlier on in high school, can take the form of employment. Summer jobs are still good. Students can take jobs during the summer, and there's a lot to be gained from that type of experience. So if a student wants to, work as a camp counselor, work scooping ice cream, or, doing whatever they might want to do in their town, that is really, really helpful. That can be a really helpful experience. And then just generally hobbies. Students can, once again, we define extracurriculars really, really broadly in this process. So we really allow students to tell us whatever they would like to do. I had a student a number of years ago who I've read at various times for the state of Massachusetts. This student was the Vermont state record holder for solving the Rubik's Cube blindfolded. So his hobby was Rubik's cubing, right? And I said that, and I know that kid. I knew a kid like that in high school or college. Those really are really, really helpful, important things. And those hobbies can be learning a language. They can be, reading a specific author, like their entire catalog of work, or learning an instrument, or taking care of family members, or tutoring a cousin. Hobbies are really, really all-encompassing, and we want to know that students, what they do outside of the classroom. Exploration refines interests, and it really provides a breeding ground for building resilience. And then this is kind of also a thesis for me. I always encourage students and parents, as they kind of go through high school and the college process, to say no later. I think sometimes earlier on we can get caught up in our perceptions of extracurricular activities, our perceptions of specific colleges or universities, and we're like, that's not for me. No, I'm not gonna go there, I'm not gonna like it. Don't say that, Say no later. Say yes right now. Right? Especially as ninth grades and 10th grades, your students have a lot of time in high school to explore. And so say yes now, and then if a few weeks or a few months, you're like, actually, I don't like that. What did Jack say? I said, quit it. You don't have to do it, right? But say yes now, because I think, your students will surprise themselves about where they find community and what they find really interesting. And the same applies to the college search process. I think sometimes, your college counselors or your family friends might say, hey, Johnny should look at XYZ school. And, you might not have ever thought of your student going to that school for whatever reason. And sometimes it's like, no, that's not for them. It might be. So, think about, going on exploratory trips and kind of doing research into places that you might immediately things that might not immediately resonate with you, because you actually might surprise yourself in a really nice way. Okay, documentation. So this is really important as well. We want your students to explore, find what's interesting for them, but also you'll find that the application itself really does require quite a bit of specificity. So when your students apply, they are going to have to provide quite a bit of information. And this is just a small screenshot of what the activities section of a Common App looks like. And basically, we ask you what you've done. We ask you to categorize it. Is it art? Is it cultural? Is it family responsibility? Your student will also be asked how many weeks per year did they engage with it, how many hours per week, and then how many grades a student did that in. So I would say keep a running list of what your students do, or have them keep a running list of what they do, just because when it comes down to the summer before your student's senior year, can be actually somewhat hard to remember what they did and what that actual time commitment looked like. We are not looking for a resume, and students will have 10 places in the Common App to tell us what they do. Editing will be necessary, but it's nice to at least have some type of running list of those activities, just so you can then kind of curate that list after you're done. And then this is, once again, just a screenshot, so it kind of gives you a sense. But I like this example because this student did things for 9th and 11th grade, 11th and 12th grade, 11th and 12th grade. They also had some family responsibilities on the side that they kind of listed at the bottom. But you can see they did kind of a really nice job of showing quite a bit of impact and initiative. So, they competed in a contest, and they were also lead editor, but also I see impact and initiative in kind of creating a documentary photography project. So just an example of how you'll be asked to present things, but then also the fact that there can be lack of continuity and it still be fine. And this is a little woo-woo, but I think it's worth mentioning. Being present. So, most college counseling support at most schools, including Petty, doesn't begin until the junior year, and that's for good reason. Really the focus of 9th and 10th grade should be really acclimating to high school, performing well academically, exploring, and then finding community. It's a big transition to come to high school, and 9th and 10th grade should be spent doing that. Applying to college should not be an extracurricular unto itself. We typically joke in our office, if you take the SAT or ACT more than 3 times, you should be listing it as an extracurricular activity. And we don't want this process to get to that point for you. There'll be a lot of time for you to kind of to focus upon this and talk about it, but if you can stave off those conversations until the end of or at some point during your junior year, I think you'll find that you won't burn out as quickly because it can be really exciting, but all-consuming in many ways. And there's also a lot of data to support that being mindful and being present actually really does support mental health. So any ways that you can kind of encourage your students to be present and get off their phones and get off screen time and be quiet with themselves will probably pay dividends in the end. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. If any student, I don't know that Ferris Bueller is very popular with high school students anymore, but if your students haven't seen it, I know, I also agree. I have a few Ferris Bueller quotes during my information session, and only the parents ever laugh at it. So, but famous Chicago movie, I think if you're coming to Chicago or Northwestern, we'll throw them in, you should definitely be making your kids watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's important, yeah. It's a great movie, yeah. So maybe if you find that you're going to, you're getting into huge battles with your kids over college, just pop on Ferris Bueller's Day Off to ease the tension. If you're going to talk about college, if you find that it's something that's entering kind of your world and your students bringing up organically and you're talking about it with them, I typically advise students to pick a day and time to discuss the topic. Maybe it's already your least favorite day of the week. Maybe that's the day you talk about college. But it's really, really nice to know that Thursday at dinner is when we discuss college, and then after it, you can just say, hey, we're going to table it until then. If you plan college visits, especially earlier on, I encourage students to be really mindful of the order of visiting. For instance, it's probably not wise to visit Harvard, Yale, and Princeton on your first trip out of the gate because it sets kind of hard expectations for students sometimes. Those are all fantastic schools, but it can also, it can sometimes create kind of an unfair standard by which other schools are judged. It can also kind of communicate something to your kids about the schools that are worthy of them going to or where you see them going. So if ultimately they find someplace else that's not Harvard, Yale, or Princeton or one of the other Ivy League schools, they are feeling as though it's just as good as those places that you kind of want them to go. Say no later. Once again, I think in this college search process, saying no later is really, really great. I pulled up to my undergrad experience, undergrad campus visit, completely not interested in Lehigh at all. We pulled up and I was like, I don't like this place. It's weird. The kids look weird. It was cold. I was like, I'm not going to like this at all. And I left and I was like, I love this place. I would love to go to college here. And so that's kind of how my process went, and that's not uncommon. So I would say try out many different types of schools, small liberal arts colleges, big state universities, and see kind of where your students resonate, or what resonates with them, rather. Okay, some final notes, and then I think we'll save some time for questions. Petty is such a great school. You've made such a good decision to send your students here. Your students are going to go to great places. If it worked earlier, the college counseling office would start earlier. Once again, this idea of starting during junior year, it is the standard. It is when students are ready to start talking about it. And there really isn't a lot of benefit in starting earlier. If there was a secret, the college counseling staff would probably share it with you. They'd also probably write a book and be mega wealthy and not work here. Trust the college counseling office. Well, once again, I think it's funny sometimes in going through, and especially talking with parents, sometimes when you talk about, my kid's applying here, and then the kind of guidance is like, I don't know that that's a fit, and I don't know that it's gonna work out. Sometimes parents say like, oh, well, let's just see. Who knows what's gonna happen? College counseling office. So make sure that when they give you guidance, I would say take it earnestly because they know what they're doing. They also work really hard to have connections and relationships with the school. So I am on the phone with the Petty College counseling staff at multiple points during the admission cycle, just to kind of check in to see kind of how is it going at Petty, and then we kind of share information. So they know their stuff, and they're really, really good at their work. So. I didn't pause for questions at any point. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. My kid is more interested in internships at a very early age in summer. And I am trying to motivate him to actually take courses, not trying to get into internship. But obviously he refuses. Is it okay if he's doing it? He actually did internship even in middle school. I'm worried that he would one day wake up and say, hey, I don't want to go to college. I would want to join a job. Is there a way to redirect him into studies?
That's a good question. From the college, and I can only speak from the college vantage point, aligned with what I was saying earlier, like we don't have a preference over coursework versus an internship. So my admissions officer hat is saying if a student likes internships and wants to kind of see what it's like to be in a workplace in that way, it's completely fine. I'm not sure how to redirect him to coursework. Beyond saying like, what interests you? And then beyond that, let's find a way to kind of engage with that in a really kind of creative way, And that could be like a summer program, let's get you, you're gonna take a class, but also guess what? You get to be on campus at a college that you're really interested in. It can be perhaps a kind of engaging way to activate that conversation, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Hello, fellow Lehigh alumni here.
Oh, hey.
Quick question for you. So you had mentioned earlier in your slides that there was 50,000 students that were applying to University of Chicago. You said 90% of them are perfectly admissible.
Yeah.
How are you looking at all of those applications? Are you using AI tools? Are you using some sort of automated way of kind of filtering some folks out? How are you able to kind of weave those central themes through each student's application? Yeah, our office right now is not engaging with AI for selection purposes. I mean, in any way, really. We are not. Basically, anytime we've increased our applicant pool by about 1,000, our senior leadership has made sure that we hire at least one more admissions counselor. So our reading load at UChicago is about 1,200 files a year, which is pretty standard and on the lower end for some of the Ivy plus group, some of whom, like admissions officer reading load, are really, really high. But we do that because we want to make sure that people are, not physically, there's no physical files anymore, but we're just, human eyes on every file are happening. I do know at some larger state schools, they do kind of have programs for kind of looking at applications and then suggesting kind of what decision they might receive. But even in those cases, like people are still looking at those files and rendering real admissions decisions. So, but it's something that we're definitely grappling with. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I can go. I have a 9th grader, and I was just wondering, is there some optimal AP strategy here? From your perspective, are more AP is a good thing? Yeah. And how do we think about that as parents and also from the student's perspective, like, is there some optimal AP strategy?
Yeah. So generally when we talk about rigor, we encourage students challenging themselves, thoughtfully within whatever is available to them. I mean, it differs depending upon school, because some schools offer, 22 APs, some school offers 3 APs and challenge, and then there can be limits by grade of how many APs that you can take. I think generally, the limit per year at Petty is 3, right. And so I think, if that type of challenge feels accessible and like a student will do well, like I think getting to that max is perfectly fine. But if a student doesn't want to do that, or they don't feel as though they're going to be successful in a specific area, I think opting for the non-AP option is fine. In our process, we don't count APs. Like I'm not sitting through a file and saying like, this student took this many APs, this student took alternative number of APs, and we don't compare students. So I would say challenge, in a highly selective environment, challenging yourself to, as much as you can, and maintaining balance with other areas of your life would be a general strategy that I would advise. So, yeah.
Jack,
Hi.
first, thank you for coming to share so much inside information. So my question is around the soft skill or deep level thinking part.
Yeah.
I know lots of schools are kind of like skipping the interview recent years, and also it's very hard to, even with a school with interview, it's very hard to get to that line yet. I'm wondering for students like who has very strong soft skill, especially like building relationship, likable personalities, that type of thing. What type of application or profile you have seen they successfully deliver this in their application? I understand like in the essay you can share some story, but do you guys see other like maybe they made a video or like anything?
Yeah, there's lots of ways that students can show those soft skills. One of them is through the essay. And I kind of shared this during the essay writing workshop I had earlier with the junior year class. But this student submitted an application this year. And this is just an example, but I think students can think about this as, in other areas of their life. But a student this year wrote about the 10-5 rule in his family, which basically meant that when he's walking on the street and he encounters a stranger, at 10 feet away, he looks up and makes eye contact with them. And then 5 feet away, he says hello. And so I walked out of that essay and I was like, oh, this student is going to say hi to people on campus. Isn't that a nice thing? And it is. And I went to committee, I brought up that essay topic, and my boss said, he sounds lovely, let's admit him. So I think those are ways that you can certainly think about soft skills. Like think about those ways that students show, community building. Like those can be great essay topics. But there's a lot of ways to do it outside of just the essay. I think additional letters of recommendation can be really, really helpful. So if there's any areas of your student's life, an extracurricular or a family member or a friend who can really speak to a student's kind of soft skills and who they are as a person, we do accept letters of recommendation, supplemental letters of recommendation, and most schools will. Schools differ by policy slightly, so say check out the school. And then also we do offer, and a lot of schools will offer the opportunity for some type of video. So to your point, a lot of schools are kind of stepping away from interviews, either by admission staff or alumni. And in that place, most schools allow the opportunity to submit a video. So some videos will have a prompt. A lot don't though. So we just have a 2-minute video profile. So students can, for 2 minutes, show us or tell us something that we wouldn't see otherwise. Students have taken me on a tour of their bookshelf before. Students have interviewed their best friend about kind of how they are as a friend. I had a student who had, he's a senior in high school. He had 2 twin sisters in kindergarten, and his 2-minute video was interviewing about their day in kindergarten. Think about these small areas of your life that speak to kind of, who you are as a person, and that can be kind of like the platform through which you can highlight those pieces. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your insights. This is really so helpful. I have 2 sort of, they're not related questions, but they might sound like they're being asked by the same parent.
Sure.
One is, how do you look at students that choose to take a PG year? Is that different than how you're looking at other students? And then the related question, I guess, is how do you look at students age at time of admission if they're younger or older for a freshman?
Yeah, the PG year, so postgraduate year or taking a gap year, from our vantage point is completely fine. I think we see that students who take some type of postgraduate year or gap, oftentimes they come to campus a little bit more mature, a little bit more focused. They come to campus with often a really interesting experience. And students will do a lot of things during their postgraduate year. Some study, some travel. I also read for New Jersey, but I also read for the Middle East, and a lot of Middle Eastern countries have military expectation, and so those students come in with military experience, and so I think we are very affirming of students' decision to take that year because we know that students come with a really interesting perspective, and once again a little bit more mature and focused. The age question. It's something that is taken into account in the holistic review. Students are a little bit older. I think that is generally a little bit of an easier thing to kind of envision, just because they're 19 or 20 versus 18, which just a little bit more of an adult. We do have students apply every year who are 14 years old, 15 years old. Those can be a little bit more of a challenging conversation just because often, we do have a 2-year residency requirement. Students are required to be in our residence halls for at least their first 2 years. So we think about, the student might be incredibly academically talented, but at 14 years old, are they going to be successful in a residential community where we also house first through fourth year students at UChicago together. So they'll be living with also 22-year-olds. We think about, will this 14-year-old have a good experience, and are they prepared for living in an environment like that? So it's not a no, but it's something that we definitely consider. Yeah.
Okay, is this on?
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to share with us today. What advice do you have for kids who don't yet know what they want to do? Taking an AP class in something you don't enjoy or don't yet know if that's what you want to pursue may be a challenge. And as a parent, how do you advise a child to still explore but find what they love at this stage?
Yeah, the rigor question is a good one. If a student doesn't know what they want to do and they have a sense of the direction, and that does not include a specific option that does have an AP route, I would say, from my vantage point, I wouldn't say it's incredibly important that they challenge themselves in that course. I think it's still important to take 4 years of the 5 core subjects. Like, that is something in our process and many of our peers' process is important. So like, if they're not taking AP Chem, they should still take a hard science class. So I think that's one way. And then I also think, we do consider like elective courses within areas part of that kind of core class. So maybe, a student is not traditionally interested in science, but there's an interesting, marine science class or something along those lines. I think that can be a helpful way to kind of satisfy that exploration across the disciplines, but does it in a way that's a little bit more catered to their interests. Yeah. I think also great college counselor / counselor question. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a question? Yeah. Yeah. I can also just hear you and then I can rephrase. Yeah.
My question is more around AI. We just went through the process, my eldest and the freshman in college.
Mm-hmm.
We just went through that process of admission.
Yep.
The struggle that we see, and I know it's how you said you have to use essays and everything for the kids, but
Yeah.
with the kids using AIs
Yeah.
more and more, how are you looking at those writing, whatever they
Yeah.
submit, whether personal statements or essays or textbooks?
Yeah. The question was about AI and students using it to craft responses, especially to essay questions, which are in a holistic process really, really important. So right now, we are aware that students are using AI to craft responses to their college essays. They are required to, at the end of their Common or Coalition app, to kind of check a box that says like, I've crafted all these materials and to my best of my ability, and it's my own work. But students are using it. Right now, these processes are kind of very specific to schools in some ways. Like UChicago's process is very specific and tailored to what we're looking for. It's why we have interesting supplemental essays. And so basically what we tell students, and I think is true, you could use AI to craft an essay response that allows you to get at probably something close to what you would craft on your own with, 5% of the effort. You could also use those things to craft responses to our supplemental essays, but at this point, AI has not. That will allow you to submit an application easy and quick. But from our vantage point, especially with a place like essays, the supplemental essays like ours, it will allow you, those responses will not meet the criteria for originality or creativity that actually will strengthen a file. So I think it's a great way to, that's kind of our stance right now. Yeah. So, but are we checking? No, we're not checking. Yeah, we're not checking. And we've had some conversations with some computer scientists at the university about using AI checkers. And their vantage point is that AI checkers are there can be a lot of variability in what they say. Like one AI checker will say like complete AI, the other one will say it's not at all. And so they've kind of cautioned that like it's a tool, but the results, what that will yield isn't actually going to be correct or consistent. So, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
I had a question about athletics and how committees view athletes, with perhaps one that will, really loves the sport, maybe makes varsity, but it's not going to be playing in college, or recruited athlete versus recruited athletes.
Yeah. So wait, what was the question? So
how do you sort of view participation in sports?
If they're not going to be a varsity athlete?
Yeah,
or
if they are or if they aren't, just kind of.
Yeah, so I think if they are not, I think we look at it as a pretty robust, vibrant way that student can spend their time. Being an athlete requires time management, it requires organization, community building, all those great stuff that we look for. We would just kind of see it that way. Recruited athletes, if a school has a recruitment process, it does typically impact the process in a substantive way. They will be expected to still complete the requirements for a typical first-year admission. So they'll have to complete a full application, all the essays, letters of recommendation. They'll need to kind of apply through the standard route. But a coach's kind of acknowledgement that this student I've recruited them, they are going to be contributing at the varsity level, that is something that we take into consideration, especially because if you are good enough to play at a varsity level, even at the Division III level, we understand that that coach's support has often meant that then you are closing yourself to other conversations and other opportunities that schools will offer. And so we in the admissions office, and there's typically a pre-read process, we typically acknowledge that is a significant part of your search. And if we've given the green light through the green light process and the coach has recruited you, then we should probably honor that process. Yeah.
Quick question. Okay. A very good session. Thank you very much. My daughter is a day student, and we live in the area, surrounded by excellent, incredible, amazing public high schools as well. Yeah. So when you look at someone from a great public high school, great academics, extracurriculars, and look at Petty, where there's additional support, how do you evaluate? Is there, do you benchmark differently? Just curious to see how you see these students. Yeah.
So our standards for excellence at admission don't change depending upon high school. The high school context is incredibly important. So the context of resources and academic achievement is very high school specific, but that's going to look a little bit different depending upon what school you're at, because rigor differs and things like that. So. I would say that it's all context-based. And when I read Petty, I'm very familiar with, West Windsor, Plainsboro High School, North and South. I also read those schools. And so I know when I'm looking at a Petty student versus one of those students, I know kind of what it means to achieve at a similar level, not an identical level, but looking at resources and things like that. And this is where I think the relationships with college counseling teams become really important. This is why fall travel becomes really important, and spring travel. I come in the fall every year to talk with students and meet with them, see what's new here. So that context is that gathering of information is really helpful. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Would you recommend a student prioritizing more rigorous course and scoring a grade between B+, A-, or taking a less rigorous course and scoring A+, AA+?
Yeah, that's a great question. The tongue-in-cheek answer is always take the hard class and get an A+. But if you can't do that, that's fine. I would say, between those two, rigor is important to us. And I don't know that there's a meaningful difference between an A- and a B+ and an A+. So I would say, if your student thinks that they can challenge themselves in that coursework, they enjoy that coursework, and that additional challenge will not force them to sacrifice balance in their life, it will force them to not, sacrifice their mental health, I think about that more rigorous option. Yeah.
Time for one more.
Sorry, my question is kind of along the same lines. So when we're talking about hard versus easy class, how do you look at unweighted versus weighted GPA, especially with public schools and AP class opportunities?
Yeah, one of the interesting thing about GPA in our process is that we don't recalculate it at all, and we actually don't aggregate or collect that data in any way. So I don't even take a look at AP, or I really don't take a long look at GPAs. It's something that might be on the transcript, it might be reported by the counselor on the school report, but that is not nearly as important to me as looking at, by the year, what class was taken at what level and what did students achieve. So I don't really pay attention too much at all to the GPA just because it isn't important in our process. It is not. Yeah. So there's lots of reasons that a student might not want to take the AP test. And so if a student ultimately does not choose to go forward with that test, it's not something that I hold against them. And there's also, most of the time, AP scores are self-reported in the application itself. So, and I know that there's many reasons why a student might not self-report testing. So sometimes a student does poorly, and they should just choose to not report that score. Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Thank you so much. Fantastic presentation. Love the focus on patience and proportionality and being present. I think that's much needed, so thank you. We saw a lot of negative words come up in the beginning, which is kind of too bad, right?
Yeah, that
it's an
was
exciting
tough.
time. I'm the parent of a freshman, but talking to parents who have older students, one sense I get of, one source of that stress, I gather, is a movement towards applying to a voluminous number of schools. Because it means you're not only undertaking this complex, kind of stressful process, but you're dividing your attention 20 different ways, geographically, bandwidth-wise, resource-wise. And that's a stressor for families. Yeah. Do you sense that there'll be any trend kind of to pull back from that strategy of sort of spreading so widely this spread of applications? And is there a way to kind of balance against that to sort of maybe focus a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a good question. I hope that the tide is going to turn there. There is, for context, there is a trend where most students are applying to now 18 to 20 schools. Not most, but some are. And so I hope that it will. I think there's unfortunately a negative feedback loop here because, on the student side, they're applying to all these schools because they want to see what happens, because in their eyes, our decisions are becoming increasingly less predictable. But our decisions are becoming increasingly less predictable because we know students are applying to so many schools. So it's kind of this really ugly cycle where if students will apply to 5 schools, I would be far more excited to put my ring in the hat. But when it's a regular decision and you have 18 other schools out there, I'm I don't know where your interest is. So I would hope so, but I don't know. Yeah, of course.
Thank you again to Jack and to all of you for fantastic questions.
Thank you.
We know that there's a little bit of a gap between our end here and our next presentation. If you want to grab something to drink, something to eat, please do so. The next presentation begins at 11:15. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.